Destination Aviation with your host, Jeff Miller. And if you're a returning listener, thank you. Maybe this is your first embarkation point. And if that is, welcome to Destination Aviation, your source for all things aviation. And I would say the number one podcast in aviation, rated by me. But no, I'm really happy to have everybody on this journey today. Hope you're buckled in and getting ready to head out the door with us. We have Mark Fava on the show today. Mark wrote a book, Lessons from the Admiral, the lessons that he learned from his time in the Navy. It's such a good read. It's a fun read. You can pick it up now in places like Amazon, local bookstores. We'll put all that in the show notes, how you can connect with Mark. He's very personable, great person to get to know. I've kind of gotten to know him virtually, and also I've got to know him over his work through the book. So a very fun, good read. I used it while I was traveling. We'll get into some of the stuff here with the audio book side to it that he did, but awesome book, awesome author, and I think you're going to like it. I did. I enjoyed it, and I think you're going to enjoy this conversation too. A little insight into the author himself. So without further ado, we'll kick right into our interview here with Mark Fava, and then as usual, we'll round things out with some show notes at the end and a quick story from a listener. Well, Mark Fava, welcome to Destination Aviation.
Jeff, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time, so thanks a lot.
No, thank you. You know, it's interesting. Everybody that I've had on the show so far, I've actually met in person. I've never met you, but I kind of feel like I know you from reading your book. If that sounds weird, I don't know, but that's how I feel.
No, that's tremendous, because I think that's how you first connected with me. You said you had the book and we love to talk, and there's no greater humbling honor than when somebody reaches out to you and says you've read your book. I was at a seminar a couple weeks ago, and this lady came up and she said, "Can I hug you? I've read your book." So I said absolutely. So
that's
so
great.
Thank you.
It's probably one of those things that you don't expect from writing a book, that you make friends that you never even met.
Right, and it's kind of scary, because you're people that write and that talk, and same thing with a podcast, you're laying yourself out there. So there's a level of exposure, and you're like, okay, I don't know if this is going to work or not, but I'm going to put it out.
No, you're absolutely right. Sometimes somebody will come up to me and they'll be like, "I didn't know blah blah blah." I'm like, I don't think I ever told. I was like, oh wait, I did say that on a podcast. That's right.
yeah. It's been funny between the book and LinkedIn. It's just amazing the reach that they have, and that people know you and you don't know them.
Yeah, so your book and this, Lessons from the Admiral, correct? That's the book we're discussing. I see it right behind your shoulder as we're talking here. It's an amazing book. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I just recently saw, too, you were in New York City and you had a big graphic, right, in Times Square. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was surreal. I was going to be up there anyway. I got an invitation from, get this, some aviation lawyers to come speak to the New York City Bar Association. So I was trying to figure out a way to coordinate it. I said, wouldn't it be cool if I could get my book up on a billboard? And it worked. And it was, they tell you the exact time. They say 7 minutes after the hour for 24 hours for 1 minute. So, everything we were doing in New York City, I took my our two younger daughters up there. I would run back over to Times Square at 7 minutes after the hour for that 1 minute to take pictures and to just enjoy the moment.
Oh, I love that. No, it's amazing. I can't even imagine. I've been to Times Square several times, and to see your name and what you kind of developed sitting right there in front of you, it's amazing. And from reading the book, one of the things not maybe surprising, but some of the notes I wanted to talk to you about, but I guess this one kind of fits here, is you actually wrote this book back, was it late 80s, early 90s, and then you put it aside?
Yeah, I did the outline for the book after I finished my job. So as you know, the book is about my first, my last active duty job in the Navy as an admiral's aide. That would have been right before I went back to law school. You're right, late 80s, 89 to 91-ish. And then the notes sat in the closet for, 20 or 30 years till COVID came along, and I got tired of watching TV, and I said, let me just do something productive. So it took me 2 years, and I wrote the book, and it was really fun going back 30 years ago and saying, okay, can I really remember what happened? And that was a challenge.
Yeah, I love it. It's probably with some of those nuggets from your past, almost like a song maybe of like, oh yeah, I remember that. Because when I was reading your writing, I kind of felt engrossed in what you were talking about. And when you would write, like I wrote, this is the letter that I wrote from the Admiral back, and this is how I think it went. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like you're pulling back into the recesses from back in the time you were doing this. And this time frame that you were now, I guess for the listeners, I learned a lot from this book. You were a loop to the Admiral, correct?
Right. I was an admiral's aide. So, most admirals have somebody. It's like not unlike a chief of staff or an executive office assistant. The only difference being, I mean, you were incredibly responsible from, sunrise to sunset for execution of everything, just like we do in aviation. And it's got to be perfect. It's got to be punctual. And there's reasons for that. And that's what the job was. And it was 18 months, I think, about, and just really a wonderful experience.
No, I loved it. Even reading, I love to read. I enjoyed this. I enjoyed one because I have to travel a lot for my day job. And it was a great read while I was traveling. And it was interesting because I had a new recruit into the Navy sitting next to me in the middle seat of a flight, and he was actually flying into O'Hare to go to.
Great Lakes, the training center.
Yeah, and
how about that?
He was like, "What's your book about?" Because he saw the cover, and I'm like, "Oh, well, look at this serendipity here. Everything kind of connects."
Yeah. I was up in Chicago a couple of weeks ago, and shopping the book at a couple of Barnes and Nobles just for that purpose, because it. It's funny. It does real well with military, but also with leaders and aviators. And then, the biggest honor, somebody will read it and say just that, hey, I just passed it along to a young person because I think this is just as important to them as it is to us, and they need to know that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting for me, and I'll be the first to admit, when I saw the cover of the book, when I initially was getting the book and reading it, I thought you were the Admiral. Lessons from the Admiral. I was like,
yeah.
And then, when I was like, and then it started for me. I was like, hey, wait a minute. He worked, in my mind, when I was in the military, he worked for the Admiral.
Correct.
And then I'm looking at all the lessons, and, I've been in aviation now for 25 years, and going back through, I was like, oh, yeah, that's, when you were talking about things like when the transfer was handed over, and the person that was transferred over gave you the toothpicks for the Admiral, the little things, though, and I was like, for me in my job today, so I'm, my day job's an executive director of an airport.
Absolutely.
And when I travel with like the board of directors, I was like, when I thought about your toothpick example, for me it was business cards because they always forget business cards.
Yes.
I'm like, oh, I'll put that in my. So for me, I'm like, oh, another lesson for me in my current job. I loved it. So to your point about whether you're young or older, there was lessons in here I was able to pull out and be like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's transferable. Two thoughts. The funny thing is, you're not the only one. So a great majority of people see me and they say, or they'll email me and say, congratulations, Admiral. And then I got to figure out a way to tell them, look, I'd still like you to get my book, but I wasn't the Admiral. Because it's different, right? I'm writing about a leader 30 years ago that impacted me so tremendously that 30 years later, I wrote a book about that experience. And so much of it was just exactly that, the attention to detail. I needed that as an aviator. I needed that as a reservist. I needed that as a lawyer going into trial, going into a courtroom. And I need that now at the corporation. When I get ready to go in a meeting like you with the boardroom, I need to know, like I say in the book, who's who in the zoo, what are the particulars, who's going to need what, who wants a Sharpie, and it's just wonderful to be able to think ahead and pull that stuff out.
No, I love that. And like I said, for me, not only did I enjoy the read, but again, there was lessons in there for me that was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I love to, so it's your first book, right? And I think,
yes,
if I correctly, you dedicated it to your mother. Is that correct?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were a military family, so Dad was also in the Navy, and we moved like every Navy family every 2 to 3 years. And Mom was, and I say this in the book, Mom was a ferocious advocate for the family. No matter where we went, she found the best school. She'd show up at some Catholic school, and they said, we're not taking anybody else. And 3 weeks later, we'd all be admitted, and we'd all be in the honors curriculum. I mean, that's just the way Mama was.
That's a good mom.
Yeah, she was wonderful. And Dad was off, doing work. And unfortunately, right around the time, right after COVID, I guess, we as a late 80-year-old lady, she found out she had ALS. So we got her through that and saw her go with dignity. But the best thing about the whole thing was, when you write a book, they say you got to read it out loud before you give it to the editor. So I was able to read the entire book out loud to my mother as she was pretty much, losing speech and sitting there and having a difficult time. But every time I would walk through the door, she would look at me and she would say, book. and I would ask her, how was it, Mom? And, she's not going to tell me it stinks. She would struggle and she would barely raise her thumb, and it would be shaking, and she'd say, good book, good book. And so, it was one chapter a day for like 10, 15 days, and just one of the best things I ever did before she went on.
No, I love that. That's such an amazing story. Did she know back when you wrote this initially, or you were taking down notes? Did she know back in that time period eventually you were going to do this, or like you said, when it came to COVID, was it more of a surprise? Like, oh, I'm going to write a book.
It was more of a surprise, it's more of a secret,
Yeah.
It's something that you do. And I remember going to my publisher, and they said, look, the first thing you got to start telling people is you're an author. I said, well, I'm not. I haven't published anything. No, you got, it's almost like you're going to an AA meeting. You got to say, and once you tell people that, people get very intrigued. In my original cohort of about 15 or 20 prospective authors, only 3 of us made it through and wrote and published books. So I got to the point where I would test it with people. I'd say, I'm writing a book, and they'd say, oh, okay. And then everybody, you get the eye rolls, right, from some people. But when you get the final PDF version and you're designing the cover, it gets really real.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I love that you said that, because it's, I guess Authors Anonymous, is that AA?
Yeah, it was just very bizarre. No kidding. They had the name tags on the table, and they said, I am an author, and you had to put your name on it. Then you had to go around the table and say, you got to tell people, don't be ashamed of it, because you really don't know that the average nonfiction first-time author published book barely sells 250 copies. You're lucky if you can break 250.
Wow.
So there's a little bit of that.
You're #1 bestseller on Amazon, correct? From what I see.
I hit three different categories.
That's
and
great.
On release day, which was phenomenal, and I attribute that just to a large group of friends that in military that saw the book and supported me, and lawyers.
Yeah.
And pre-sales, the first print, the first 2,000 copies were gone in about 60 days, and I had, I'm on my second edition now, which is really fun.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I see on your LinkedIn all the places that you're going and what you're doing, and it looks like you're having a lot of fun with it, and it's so awesome to see that in this industry. I've worked with some people that have written books as well, and it seems not only really rewarding for yourself, maybe somewhat cathartic to get your opinions and thoughts down onto paper, but what a treat when it's successful as well.
It's funny, because it's a roller coaster, right? I've had book signings. I did one down at the Marine Corps, near the Marine Corps Air Station in Beaufort. I love it because there's a lot of jets, and there's Marine Corps Air Station, and that's where I go to see the Blue Angels Air Show every couple of years. And I showed up there in a wonderful little independent bookstore I think it's just called the Beaufort Bookstore, and a huge South Carolina afternoon thunderstorm, lightning bolts, everything. And I'm like, well, this is not good.
Yeah.
The bookstore owner had a spread of fruit and wine set up. You know how many people showed up, Jeff? One young Marine showed up. And he said to me, he said, Mark, where you really ought to go is Jacksonville, North Carolina, up near Camp Lejeune. That's where all the Marines buy their books.
Okay.
So, 4 weeks later, I found myself at the Barnes & Noble Camp Lejeune, probably 20 or 30 books, a steady stream of Marines. So, there's the ups and downs, and you're just sitting there thinking, okay, please, somebody come in, and, they'll come in and walk right by your table, not even look at you because they know you're trying to sell. Right. And then the flip side is, I've had a couple that it's been nonstop traffic, which is just a lot of fun.
Yeah, again, I think there's something very brave, like you had said earlier on, about putting yourself out there and discussing, things in one, that your own experience is putting that down on paper, but kind of the same too, like what we're doing here right now. And you mentioned this, but doing a podcast, putting stuff out there. I too was kind of like, okay, I had done this for a year. And then, when it came time really to put it out to my network, I was like, I don't know how people are going to respond to it. I've had enough of this guy. I don't want to listen to him. But it's funny. So literally this last Wednesday, I had somebody come up to me and they're like, I've listened to 40 of your episodes so far. And I'm like, that's a lot of Jeff Miller. That's a lot to deal with.
But it's a tribute to, the quality of the product, the fun, the information you're putting out, and the hard work. A lot of people tell us, Jeff, oh, you guys are really lucky. So what do in it? There might be a little bit of luck in there. But there's a lot of work. Right? There is a lot of recording, coordinating, editing, putting the podcast together.
Yeah. Well, and on your side too. I mean, you're out on the circuit, right? Not only did you write the book, you wrote the book, and now you're the book's biggest champion, right? I mean, I see you. I do think you do a phenomenal job of putting the word out there that, hey, this is out. And, same with me. And I read it and I'm like, this is, it wasn't the book I expected it to be. It was something for me that I was like, wait a minute, this is lessons that I can take even at this point in my career. And it was a very enjoyable read. I like I said, I did a lot of it traveling, but a lot of it resonated. And your stories, again, if you feel like you know the author, I felt like I knew you. I love that you dedicated the book to your mother. You talked about, I think when you were in Jacksonville, right, station, and then when you left to go be the loop for the Admiral, that was
Right.
it Maine? Is that correct?
Correct. Brunswick, Maine.
Brunswick,
Yeah.
Maine. And you had to leave your wife, correct, to go to Maine?
Left my then girlfriend. I had met her. I had orders to Brunswick, Maine. I had been in Jacksonville 3 years, working really hard as a first-time aviator, naval flight officer in the back of a P3, going away on 6-month deployments. And, as luck would have it, the month before I leave, I meet this beautiful young lady. I'm thinking, okay, this is not good. And we talked about what to do, but I'd only known her for a month, and I knew that I had to dedicate myself, to the Admiral,
Yeah.
and that there wasn't going to be a whole lot of downtime. So I left her there, and then went on after that and went to law school, made the same decision.
And the Admiral wanted to keep you, right?
Yeah, the Admiral wanted to keep me, which was really a fun part of the book. But I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah. It's funny. So from your Jacksonville days, I worked in Daytona Beach at the airport there for several years, and I always loved seeing the P3s doing their touch and goes.
Yes,
Because there was this kind of just log line of black behind it. And you knew they were in the pattern because it just started like, is it getting cloudy out? What's going on here?
Yeah, those four Lockheed Electra engines, Allison turboprops, put out a little bit of black smoke.
Well, so I was talking to a P3 pilot, and I told him that we were going to have this podcast at some point coming up, and he said to me, he goes, I wrote it down because he goes, make sure you tell Mark that it's the 4 fans of freedom. Because that's what they call it.
Yeah, a couple of things. When I have that discussion, as you mentioned, people say, hey, congratulations, Admiral. I said, well, I wasn't the Admiral. I said, well, at least you were a pilot. I said, no, I was a backseat guy. I was a naval flight officer. I was like, Goose in Top Gun 1 and just Bob in Top Gun 2. Not nearly as, cool and sexy as Tom Cruise. I was in the back. And then they say, well, how was it flying off the aircraft carrier? I'm like, oh, boy, this is going downhill quick. It's land-based in this big lumbering P3 4-propeller engine and, never served any time in active duty on an aircraft carrier, let alone any Navy ship.
Well, and that was when your time that you spent in Maine, that was part of potentially what could have been your next duty, right? And you were making that decision on whether you were going to go to be an aircraft, or I should say, I don't know if it was an aircraft carrier, if it was.
It was.
It was,
yeah,
okay.
A plum job for a P3 tactical aircraft commander or a navigator would be to go be an assistant navigator on an aircraft carrier. And the detailer who tells you where you're going to go had called me and said, look, we've got this great job for you for your payback for being an Admiral's aide. You're going to be what we call an ANAV on the USS whatever. And it was a brand new nuclear carrier. And I was like, oh boy, how do I tell them I don't want to do that? I want to go to law school. I mean, it was tough.
Well, considering what it looks like you've done with your life, I think you probably made the right decision there, at least from an independent observer.
Well, thank you. I had the best of both worlds. I was able to go to law school and stay in the reserves and continue to hang out and fly with some incredible people. And then Monday through Friday, go be a lawyer, which was, and an aviation lawyer at that, right? Ended up at Delta, like you and me, just following our passions.
It's funny. When I was going through the book, I was there's some things, like I said, that really did resonate, and one of the things earlier on, I think when you first started being it's a loop, but what's the official title to the Admiral?
Yeah, it's Admiral's aide.
Admiral's aide, okay.
Yeah.
And loop is really what the other officers...
Loop is just a nickname
okay.
Because you're wearing the aglet. You've got a gold braid that's a circular loop that pins on the top of your shoulder. And aguilet, I guess, is the correct, or close enough to the correct French pronunciation. And it's a loop. It's a circle. So he would call me, hey, Loop, hey, Loop. Like every aviator, he didn't call me Mark or Aide. He'd just say, Loop, get over here.
Well, and when you were talking about, where you were within the military, but you were really his right-hand person for managing his day-to-day life, that I kind of love the back and forth that you had where you knew somebody maybe outranked you, but you had to use your loop to get what you needed to for the Admiral. And I can't imagine the book, you explain it very well, but just, it seemed like you did a good job of managing, not, irking people too much further down your career. Maybe you were no longer a loop.
Right. Look, it's a very precarious position because you're the most junior person in the room almost 99% of the time. But they also know that you're speaking for the admiral and you're trying to work for him. But you still have to be diplomatic because, as I said in the book, I knew 15 or 20 years later that I would cross paths because the P3 community was a very small community with some of those people, and I did. I mean, I remember people looking at me and saying, "Oh yeah, I remember you," and I'm thinking, "Oh boy, I hope it was a good experience." But I talk about that in the book, the importance of being punctual. And I had to go up a couple times into a cockpit and tell guys that were much senior to me, you got to slow down, and they didn't slow down. And finally, I had to get up there and just be very, very direct and say, it's not going to be good tomorrow if we're late or if we're early. And then they got it.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, probably you as a leader, because I worked with your assistant to set up this podcast, and in my mind I was thinking, well, I guess she's his loop.
Exactly the same. It's the equivalent of, as you mentioned, right hand man, right hand person, the person who helps you tremendously, without whom you won't be successful, and makes your life so easy and the execution flawless.
Absolutely. We're talking about some of your experiences with time, and I wrote down one thing that I found pretty funny. Is this in not as maybe a impactful way of my life, but I've done the same thing. When you had mentioned you were flying from New Orleans to Jacksonville, Florida, or maybe it was reverse, but it was, and we can swear on this, I'm going to say, as you wrote, shit can wipe out a ton of attaboys.
Yeah, one shit can wipe out a ton of attaboys. That came from Dad. And I think it's one of like 5 curse words in the book. I was very cognizant of that.
Sure.
And I remember, because I wanted young people to read it, but at the same time, my publisher said, look, at some places you got to be authentic. And you use the terminology that you used 30 years ago. But yeah, you're exactly right. Flying from New Orleans to Jacksonville, it was like the last leg of a 3-day trip, and I completely messed it up based on the 1-hour time difference.
Easily it can happen, I mean, we've all been there, but it was one of those things that I was like, it's funny because like in this side of the world, there's some, you have some, I've had bosses, some that are more impactful, some that maybe aren't. But I had one that would, when we talk in this small case of profanity, they would use it all the time, right? It was curse word after, and it was like, okay. But then, you have someone who throws a shit or something out, and when they do it, it's impactful because they don't say it all the time.
I never say it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you're like, oh, I need to pay attention. Something's going on here.
Yeah. The Admiral would say, I am very disappointed in you. That's all he would need to say. And I told you, I said he didn't use profanity, except, like you said, when it got really bad, and then it was just damn. So the one time, I'm driving him and we get stuck in the official car at a marina, he looks at me and says, damn it, Mark, we're stuck.
But then you had the jogger, right?
Yeah, we had a Marine jogger. That was just apropos. That was luck. A Marine came by and helped us get out of the terrible situation, and I was sweating big time because, as you know, the Admiral had fired his first aide. I was his third aide, and that was always hanging over my head. Like, well, I might get fired, And he would later say, better to be good. No, better to be lucky than good. I'm not going to fire you today. I said, thank you very much, boss.
That's good. That's good. And I don't believe, I mean, obviously anybody could probably you're famous, I don't know if it's the right word, but you're somewhat of a public figure now. I'm assuming people could pull this, but I may be off on this, but I don't think you ever actually named the Admiral. Did you in the book?
I did not.
Yeah,
I did not. And that was purposeful, right? Because I wanted people to have in their own mind an image of the Admiral, sort of like that book, Lessons from Maury, where you're trying to think, what did this professor look like? And really for 2 reasons. I also wanted it to be a surprise for him. He's still alive. He lives in Norfolk, Virginia, where he retired. He went on after that job to go be the head of the Norfolk Naval Base, and then went to be the head of Naval Forces Japan and picked up a second star. And I'm still very close to him and his family, much more so his kids, because they were my age at the time. They make an appearance in the book, and I really coordinated with them that I was doing it. But I didn't want to. Every name in the book is changed for that reason.
That makes sense.
Just because I wasn't too sure what his reaction would be.
Sure.
But there's been enough time and distance in there. But his family was wonderful. When I shared the book with his daughter and his grown son, both of them came back and said, "This is wonderful. Run with it." So
I love that. Do they still invite you on vacation?
No, but get a load of this, Jeff. This is incredible. I mean, the son lives in Atlanta, has the Admiral's boat. The Admiral used to have a cruiser boat. He bought the boat down from Norfolk and has put it up in Georgetown, which is about an hour from where I live now in Charleston, north of here. And 2 weekends ago, when I was doing my first event in a Barnes & Noble in Charleston since the book launch on January 28th, he walks in the door. He was in Georgetown. Really? He walks in the door, and I was looking in line. I was like, "Oh my God, that's B." His nickname was BE. I said, "That's BE." And he comes up, and we backslap for a while, and he bought five more books. It's like, I said, BE, because I'd given them some to him to give to his children, and likewise for his sister. He came in and said, "I want 5 more," and they've been tremendous. And right before Thanksgiving of last year, I went up and flew up. Just for a day, flew up to Norfolk to see the Admiral and give him a book.
Wow. No, I love that. That's amazing. I guess, I'll be honest, in my mind, I thought he had passed on. I don't know, because probably the way that you said you in your own mind, you come up with an image of this person, and I did do that. And you described the environment so well that I could, at least in my mind, kind of plug and place. But I did. I guess I just assumed he had passed along. So it's amazing that he has an opportunity to read this from his perspective. I love that.
Yeah, it was quite an emotional day for me. I told his son, I said, "Look, I got to get up there and give him a copy." He's up in age, like my father's still alive now. His wife has passed away. I think I call her Janie in the book. She was wonderful to me. And he said, I said, "I picked a day right before Thanksgiving because I could have the day off. It was slow at work." And I just grabbed some frequent flyer miles. You know how to do that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Went on the 5 o'clock flight, connected through Atlanta, got to Norfolk, rented a car, drove to his place. It was coordinated. His neighbors helped me, find the place. His neighbor is wonderful, as you would expect him to live in. It's a wonderful townhouse on a dock or a pier that overlooks a sailing marina.
I love that.
And we talked for a couple hours, and by noon, I got right back in the rental car.
Now, when you rented this car, did you take the upgrade on that, or?
No upgrade.
And for people listening, that's a little. Yeah. You can read the book and figure out what I'm referencing there.
No upgrades.
No upgrades.
It was very low grade. Matter of fact, it was probably an economy.
No, well, it's with the travel side to it. So I guess 2 things. Because we're talking about the travel. And then we were talking a little bit about profanity, so I do want to throw this in because I started laughing, and people probably thought I was weird because I was sitting in my seat on the plane laughing to myself. But when you were describing the food that you were eating in the hall and the SOS and the shit on a shingle, that's pretty good. I never heard shit on a shingle. That was
that's like it's like a nasty piece of toast with some corned beef thrown on it, and you're looking at it and like going, "Am I that hungry? Do I want to eat that or not?" And it's been there for 15 or 20 minutes. So there's not much left of the bread, but that was what we called that. And then there was. Anytime there was some type of mysterious meat on a stick, it would be, monkey meat on a stick. And you're like going, you don't know what it is, but you're hungry, so you're going to grab it at the cafeteria.
Well, the SOS makes sense. That's probably what you were saying after the fact, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But with that, I mean, we talk about that and then the traveling. One of the things in the book, obviously because it's closer to where I am in here in Chicago, but when you were talking about traveling with the Admiral, with his family in the Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. And the wooden ships. And, one of the things, too, about the book, so I grew up on the Great Lakes, and maybe at one point I had heard about the shipbuilding that was happening at the time in Wisconsin. But the way you described that, basically they were non-metallic, and so with mines and stuff, right? That's where wooden ships still had a place, even at this point, which would have been in the 80s, correct?
Right. Any minesweeper was made primarily with wood, just because any of the metal would trigger the mine. Any magnetic force going through the water would trigger the mine. So there was this beautiful wooden shipbuilder up in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, that was building the Navy minesweepers, and we'd go up there for a trip because the Admiral's wife was the sponsor for one of those ships, and it was absolutely beautiful.
Again, to some of the lessons, but in this case, really for me as, someone who wasn't in the military, But you think, right, as just a citizen, you're like, oh, wooden ship. No, those went out in like what, 1700s, 1800s?
Yeah.
And then it's like, no, there was a purpose for it, and there was a purpose to build them, and there was a purpose to have them, and again, there's knowledge points in your book as well for me that I was like, oh wow, they were actually building wooden ships at the time for this particular. And the way you described it, it made total sense why you would want a wooden ship.
Right, and it was neat because that shipbuilder, I think it was Peterson Shipbuilders, they've long since gone. The Navy ended up going with them because they were a builder of beautiful wooden tall ships. And like, okay, where are we going to find somebody that builds wooden ships? Yeah. No other place than Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, where this company was already building these beautiful yachts and all wooden ships. And the Navy said, well, can you build us a minesweeper? And they did. They built quite a few.
Wow. Yeah, I part of your book and your I guess history through that period, those family trips, I started to feel like, again, knowing you, understand you, but you did really paint the picture of really what your job was so encompassing. I mean, not only a right-hand person to the Admiral, but really, I mean, in some ways, a member of the family. I know you in the book, you say you kind of, you felt like you were always on duty when you were on these trips, but you were there and you went on a lot of them.
Yes. Yeah, when everything is going well, you're a member of the family and everybody's back slapping. But as soon as something doesn't go as planned, everybody looks to you, because they don't know. They're just along for the ride, and you brief them beforehand. We're going to do this, do that, go here, go there, But you've got all the tickets, you've made all the reservations, you know all the timing. It's not that they would get upset or mad if something something didn't go as planned. They just look to you, and it's that internal pressure of like, okay, this I gotta recover from this real quickly and get it back on track.
I love it. Yeah, again, there's been probably the good ribbing that I've heard. So the chairman of our airport here, he went to West Point, right? He's
okay.
Yeah, and so he's like, what kind of lessons are you going to learn from the Navy?
Well, a good friend of mine, I posted something on Facebook, and I said, great book for, I'd done it for Father's Day, but a couple months before that, I said, great book for Mother's Day. And a buddy of mine, he posted, he said, you think I'm going to give my wife a book telling her lessons to learn? He said, absolutely not. I said, no, give it to her, and then she'll give it to your son or your daughter, so. But, it's funny. I've got it in the Naval Academy bookstore now. I'm getting ready. It's in the Citadel bookstore, and I'm working on both West Point and the Air Force Academy because it's the same, in the military. Yeah. And same thing with what your role is in the board, and that's just been the fun part about the book.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. Now that I'm done with it, I held on to it till we got the podcast done, but my intention is to give it to him so he can. I told him it's a really fun read. It's again, I know I've said that, and I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but it really was, and it. Again, part of it is, these people that, whether you're in aviation or whatever business line you're in, you could, like you said, adapt it to, if you're working in a corporate setting. But here, especially in my orbit, there's a lot of folks that have been in the military. And like I said, the P3 pilot that I was talking about, and they're like, oh, that's really cool. And what's it about? And so I do think that you struck a nerve there with a certain group, especially within our orbit, that are like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. And even if, like me, my first thought was, okay, well, I was in the military, I'm an open-minded person, and then again, the lessons, is what we were talking about before. You really apply it to your current job, and like I said, the business card's one thing, but you read it, you sympathize with some things. It's like, yeah, I've messed up time zones before. yeah, I've done that.
Yeah, the neat thing is that you can mess up and there can be recovery. And a good leader, I think I say this in the book, will allow you to recover, and not only allow you to recover, but will take care of you when you fail.
Yeah, and so the people that are, we have a lot of people that do listen to the podcast that aren't in aviation, and I guess for the book itself, you probably at this point in the podcast, you understand the ideology of what we're talking about, but it really was from your time in the Navy, going through with being an assistant to the Admiral and being his loop, and then from there you left to really become a lawyer, right? Is it a trial lawyer, or was it?
Yeah, corporate lawyer. I was doing most, like most lawyers, I was a litigator that started out defending car accidents. And then I moved on to trains because there were still train accidents in South Carolina. And then right before 9/11, a high school buddy of mine called me and said, hey, I know you want to be an aviation lawyer. We've got an opening at Delta. Why don't you come? And I said, no. And then, 2 months later, I told my wife, I think we're going to Atlanta. But but you're right. So this stuff is banging around in my head for 30 years, and when I'm at Delta, I'm making sure I'm on time. I'm making sure I know who's in the room. I'm making sure the boss gets what she needs. I'm making sure my writing and my pleadings and the stuff that I'm filling out is done with excellence and presents well. And that all riveted back to the days as being an aide.
No, and someone who, whether not in the military or aviation, if you're listening to the podcast and you're in your career, whether, like I said, the beginning of it, middle of it, ending, there was lessons for me because 25 years in it, there's some part of it you're like, oh, I know what I'm doing, and then you read it though, and you're like, oh yeah, you know what? That's either whether it's a refresher or something new. So there's so many lessons, regardless of where you are in your career. And again, a fun read and something that really resonates, I think, to you as the author. And I say that because there was a part in the book where you talked about a green Buick Skylark you bought.
Yes. Yeah,
I think from the Admiral, right?
Admiral's father's car.
Oh, it was his father? That's right, father's car, yes.
Yeah. We drove down to New Jersey to pick it up.
Well, when you were describing the vehicle, my brother had a Buick Skylark. Yours was in 1980, is that correct?
Yeah, it was like 81 or 82. It was in good shape when I got it.
Well, you had described in the book, I think, two things that I was, for me as a child, because my brother had that car. And you talked about having the right tools for the job, I think, correct? With the Admiral?
Yeah.
And that was a radiator hose that
right,
having
right.
issues.
We were replacing the radiator hose at the auto hobby shop, and that's part of the. I was part of the family. It's like, all right, let's go work on the car, because he knew he was going to sell it to me for some very low amount, because it would be my main winter car. So make sure you had. And I was over there banging away with a crescent wrench, tearing my knuckles up, and nothing was working. And he's like, hold on now, let's do this the right way.
Well, and the reason why it resonated in a little different way, but I had to change the radiator hose on my brother's Buick Skylark, and my dad was notorious for not having the proper tools. Usually we would have a bucket of tools that used to be in the correct spot somewhere along the way. So, and he put all his old fishing hooks in there, so you would dip your hand in. And
be very careful.
Yeah, be careful when you go get a tool. And so, as the lesson I learned from there is all my tools at home are all in the right spot.
Nice.
But it was that I found so humorous because I had a connection to it, and I think people, whether that, I mean, I know it's unique to have a Buick Skylark, but there's so many times where I think it's relatable to your own life. And there is that part of the Buick Skylark, and then when you took it back to Florida, and you were one hand holding the roof.
Yeah, I took it to Jacksonville. So when I left Maine and I joined the Navy Reserves, everybody had if you could afford it, you would take your old secondhand car, and rather than sell it, you'd leave it in Jacksonville, so you would have a reserve car. And that poor car would sit there 28 days out of the, most days of the month, maybe 20 days of the month, but the 2 weekends you were down for the reserve weekend, you'd hope the battery started, you'd hope the wipers weren't cracked off or that they towed it off. And that poor car, the interior ceiling started to come apart and sag down.
Well, we had the exact same thing. So we had a brown roof. My brother's Skylark was brown, and the brown roof would come down, and it would just, at the time I had hair, but you could feel it blowing in your hair a little bit. And you're like, what the heck is going on with this roof?
And you arrive at, you're getting there at 8 or 9 o'clock at night because you're coming in late on a Friday night because the reserve weekend starts Saturday. And and I knew other people had the problem because I went into an auto hobby shop, and sure enough, there was a can of, roof resealer. You just poke a hole and spray that stuff up in there, and then push the upholstery up and hope it would stick. And it stuck for like 3 more months, and then it came down again. So finally, I just brought a razor down there and ripped it out.
I think my brother ended up just ripping it out too, if I remember right. And
then you end up with some orange spongy stuff up there that just crumbles and falls on you.
No, it was so funny. And then you took it to the junkyard, right? I won't take it off your hands.
Yeah, I drove that car from, 91 to probably 2004, 2005. Maybe put tires on it once. Wow. I remember even coming down there one weekend, and it was a horrendous downpour, and turned on the wipers and started driving off, and I couldn't see a thing, but I heard a bunch of scratching and scraping. And I don't know if it was a practical joke or if somebody had stolen the wipers, but there were no blades on them, and the metal arms just going back and forth. So, I got to get to my lodging. So the same thing, I roll down the window and I'm looking out the window trying to drive down Highway 17 to get to the Holiday Inn because I wasn't going to stop.
No.
As terrible as that sounds, I know it wasn't very safe at the time, but.
Well, it's interesting because, we all have, especially when you start out, usually you have those old beater cars and one wiper or whatever. You got to do what you got to do. I remember my brother's car. He waxed it, and the car had been way beyond, probably a couple of decades beyond when it should have been waxed. And so the white wax just went into the cracks of the hood and the roof. And so I was like, oh, you waxed the Skylark, huh? It looks good.
It's really sporty with the wax there.
Yeah, I like the two-tone you have now, brown and white.
Yeah.
No, and it's funny because now Buick, I was just going to say, Buick has these cars, and I'm like, oh, that looks really nice, but the Skylark is seared in my mind, and I'm like, I don't know if I could do it.
Oh, it was a big green boxy car. It was classic. And the nice thing about it was, other buddies there was enough room for 4 or 5 other guys to jump in. It had a big trunk,
Oh, yeah. Well, and that was a funny thing. We would put oil in it here and there, but he drove it, forever. He ended up selling it, and it burned about a quart of oil a week, but it kept running.
That's right. Yeah, good car. Got me through two main winters and 14 years of reserve weekends in Jacksonville, Florida.
And I'm assuming, because I don't even think ours had the option for air conditioning. Did you? You probably didn't have that, right? I'm assuming.
I think the AC lasted about 6 years, and then I started buying the bottles of Freon.
Yeah, right.
And that was when they were barely selling Freon anymore because it was illegal and they weren't doing it anymore. Yep. So I bought like 2 or 3 bottles of Freon. So like you said, I had the Freon canisters with the hose, and then I had 2 or 3 quarts of oil in the trunk. But you're right. Near the end, the last 4 or 5 years, there was no AC, and it was brutal on a drill weekend in Jacksonville in the summertime. Windows down, uniform or flight suit on, driving over there, just dying.
It's funny because, again, it's something I think that's so relatable to people. Because for me, the same thing. You grow up, especially during that younger period of your life, where you're just happy to have wheels.
Yeah, wheels.
But you have your kit, right? You have your oil. You have air conditioning, like you said. I had it too. Just store it in the back because you never know when you're going to have to charge something.
That, a towel and a crescent wrench, maybe a pair of pliers.
You're solid.
You're good to go. And every now and then I would buy a gallon of that windshield wiper fluid just in case, because there'd be crud and dirt and dust all over the windshields. Assuming I had windshield wipers on the car when I got there, I would hit that fluid and get it going. And then, of course, during the winter, maybe pour a little bit of radiator fluid in there just to make sure it didn't freeze. But we didn't really have that problem in Jacksonville much.
Yeah, you probably were okay there. No, the reason why I wanted to share that is I think for listeners that maybe are contemplating buying the book is that there's some funny stuff in it and there's some relatable stuff. And again, depending on whether the Skylark is your relatable section was for me, there's so many things in here that people I think could resonate with. Like I said, just whether you're a citizen or you're flying a P3, which is what one of the folks that ran into me that I was telling about this podcast, and they were very excited about it. They were excited to read the book, and again, there's just lessons that apply, but it's not. Sometimes when you see a book, you're like, oh, this is going to maybe will be a little dry. But, there's I found myself laughing a lot at things you put in the book.
Thank you. I really wanted 2 things. I wanted it to be, like you said, a good travel book, because so many times we're on a plane and it's 138 pages. Gosh, people have read it on one trip. It's not deep in statistics or charts or footnotes. There are no footnotes. It's just stories. And my goal was to bring the reader, like you said, to bring the reader right alongside me. I wanted to, I'm sitting down that first week with the Admiral. I wanted him to be in the room with me. When I'm stuck in the car, I was hoping to do that. Main snowstorms, I wanted them to feel how I felt. So that's what I tried to do.
Yeah, I think it really came across. And like you said, the flow of the book, I just opened it to remind myself, because I remember as I was going chapter by chapter, know what is the most important to your boss, know your boss, getting things done. So it has a very nice flow to it as well. Because even one for the podcast, but I read the book probably a couple of months ago now, 3 months ago, maybe, in that timeline, And I've actually gone back to it to read a couple sections to kind of find out one lesson that you were giving that maybe I could apply to the role here that I have in my day job. And so it's also a nice quick reference too that you can go back to the content section of the book and just say, "Oh, that was the chapters." Like, you did a really nice job of laying out a sequence of events. But if you remember, right, like this section I want to go back to, the chapters themselves kind of lead you to, "Oh, that's where that was."
Yeah, and then on the in the conclusion, I tried to summarize each chapter with one sentence, so you could go back. If you didn't remember the story from the table of contents, you could go to the conclusion, and that just goes to show you it's always great to have an editor, because when I wrote the conclusion, I numbered them all, and I missed one chapter. I was just so tired. I finally got it done, and she emails me back and says, "You missed chapter 5." She says, "But how does this look for what you were trying to say?" And I said, "You got it."
Exactly. You know what you're doing.
By then I was like, that's why you're the editor.
Well, I love that. And that, because that process too, I can't remember if it was in the book or where I heard this, but whether it was in here or maybe something else you wrote, but your first publisher, right? They went under. Yeah. The company went under, correct?
Yeah, it was a phenomenal publisher that had published the David Goggins book, Can't Hurt Me. So I really wanted a publisher that was a hybrid publisher, which means I pay them to publish my book, but I wanted a professional-looking product. And they did. About 9 months into it, there was some shenanigans apparently going on with a new CEO. Boy, it just, within 48 hours, everybody was laid off, and all the authors were set out to dry, and we became creditors in a bankruptcy, not unsecured creditors in a bankruptcy case. The good news is that company has been resurrected by a new leader. They're doing very well because they had a great product. But I was able to find just another exceptional hybrid publisher who is just, I wrote him, I said, "Look, I've been burned. I don't know if I want to be burned again. And I'd like to go with you." I said, "But I want to make sure the book looks professional." And he said, this is great. He says, "I'll send you 4 books tomorrow by FedEx that we've recently published." That was just, he didn't need to do that. Because I told him, tell me 2 or 3 books that you recommend in my genre. I'll get them on Amazon. He said, "You'll have 4 books by tomorrow."
Wow. Yeah.
And I've become a real good friend of his, and will likely do my next books with him.
Yeah, I was going to mention that because I think you put out a post recently. Was it LinkedIn maybe is where I saw it, but you were throwing out some titles of next book that you want to write?
Yeah, it's the same concept, right? So the next couple of books I've thought about, and I've got outlines for most of them, is the other one would be Lessons from the Judge. I wasn't the judge, but I was the judge.
We'll establish that right now. You were not the judge.
I was the law clerk for the judge. So just like the Admiral, it was the first job I had as a lawyer, baby lawyer working for a federal judge. Taught me about life and taught me about the practice law. The other one, which my daughters really want me to write, is called Lessons from the Gunny. So it would be, when I did Marine training during my summers as a midshipman in the Navy, even that short amount of time, the stories that the gunny taught me, and they really liked that one. And then the third category was potentially lessons from the general counsel. What did I learn from the general counsel of my current company and from the general counsel of Delta, the head lawyers, and how that's impacted me? The vote on LinkedIn was very close between the gunny and Lessons from the Judge. The general counsel didn't fare very well.
Well, it's interesting though, because it seems like a series then, right?
Yeah.
Because, my first thought, I like to be cheeky with things, is you could call it, "I'm judging you," or
yeah,
don't judge me.
Yeah, and the irony is, get a load of this, Jeff, the judge is still alive, and he is another mentor in my life. He is still a federal judge. I clerked for him from 1994 to 1996, and I'm in a book club with him, and I saw him last night. And they were all laughing. They said, "What's the next book going to be?" I said, "Well, it could be about the guy in this room, but it would be just like the Admiral. I will write it and I will surprise him. I will not give it to him and ask him to read it and edit it and tell me what he doesn't like.
Yeah.
But there's nothing embarrassing in there. But at the same time, it would just be a fun evolution."
No, again, you read this book, you can tell the admiration you had for the Admiral and that role and the lessons that he taught you. And if I were him, reading what you wrote, or if I were the next person about what you wrote, you did, I think, them a justice in your book writing. I mean, you read it, and it comes across that on this podcast, a lot of times in aviation, why I do the podcast is you get a very polished version of someone, whether it's a resume or a LinkedIn profile or whatever it might be. And at the end of the day, we're all human, and we have,
Right.
we make flaws, we make errors, but there's things to learn from everybody. And then there's some people in your life that just turn out to be that mentor. And if I were the Admiral reading your book, I would be proud of you and what you've done, and that if I were him, that there was a moment in time that I was able to have that impact. So if somebody was to have the honor to have a book written by you, I think that they would be very happy for that, just from a
Well, thank you.
perspective of reading
No,
it.
well, and when I speak about the book, that's how I start and that's how I end. What type of, to your point, right? It resonates, I hope, with leaders because it's a check on how they're doing and how they're operating. And then more importantly, how are people perceiving them as a leader? And I say, do you remember the best leader you ever worked for? Everybody smiles. And then do I say, okay, do you remember the absolute worst SOB leader that you ever worked for? Everybody laughs because you know who that person is.
Oh yeah.
And then I say, okay, and you alluded to that earlier, right? There's some people good, some people bad. And then I challenge the audience and I say, who are you? Where are you on this spectrum of leadership? And then is somebody 30 years later going to enjoy what they learned from you and your relationship, and you're going to have that legacy leadership impact with somebody such that they think maybe I'll write a book about them. That's pretty neat.
No, absolutely. It's interesting because when you get into your career, when you're early on and you're more entry level and you're reporting to people,
Right.
you start to make those determinations. What I have found though in my time in my working career, I've been working painting. I started at 16 painting hangars and cutting grass and stuff like that at airports.
Yep.
And there were times where I thought maybe a boss I didn't really like at the moment for reasons were not completely accurate. And I looked at what maybe they had said or what they did to me in my role, and I have a different perspective as I get older. And I'm like, no, they were trying to train me, nor they were trying to whatever it might be. And then some of them just were SOBs, and that's life.
Yeah. I tell that to our daughters, all the time. Especially you trade off that from boss to academia, right?
Yeah.
You're all, be it high school or college, you typically think the hardest professor and quote unquote the meanest professor is not good when you're there, but gosh, when you leave, you realize how good that person was.
Oh yeah.
And usually the strictest and the meanest and the ones that hold you to standards are the ones that were the best teachers.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you look at, so you go from that being the entry level then to when you're supervising people and you're the boss, and it's especially that kind of earlier years of your life where you start supervising people. When you get older, you start looking back like, well, maybe I would have done something a little bit different there. Either way, but it's funny because I look at the spectrum, and I think the reality of this is, because this is a reality podcast, is for people that I've supervised, I'm sure I'm the SOB, and for some people, I'm the person that they're like, it's, you have that group that reach out to you, and whether at this point now in their life, they're like, hey, would you be a reference for me? Or we all have a sounding board, right? And if you're having an issue and you're having a problem, and we have that group of people that we go to, and I always kind of, I guess, assume those are the people that at some point in my career, we at least resonated on some level that it worked. Because then I have my bosses, which I do the same thing with, right? That were my boss in the past, and I still reach out to them and say, hey, what about this, and what about that?
Yeah.
And ironically, one of my old bosses is an author too, an aviation author. So,
oh wow,
yeah, look at that. We got so many authors around. AAs, right? Authors Anonymous.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody is, if they get on your mailing list, right, they can get a unpublished chapter. Is that correct? Of Lessons from the Admiral.
Yes, and I'll be honest with you. I've yet to send it out. It's in final stages, and some people have said, "When is it and where is it?" And you told me you were going to send it, and I'm like, "Okay, let me find some free time." But it will come out. A good friend of mine, a good Navy buddy of mine, ribbed me about it recently and said, "Hey, I've been waiting." But yeah, it's the last chapter. It's a subsequent chapter that I didn't put in the book, and it was just kind of fun and just not space for it. And it actually, here's the teaser. It deals with the next Admiral that I work for. So
really?
this one leaves. It's my first. It's a defining moment experience with the new Admiral.
Okay, yeah, because and then for people that obviously, if they haven't read the book and they're listening to the podcast, we talked about this, but just a reminder, obviously at the end of the book, you did leave working for the Admiral, but what ended up happening, right, is the Admiral left first and took a
Right,
new
he
position.
left Norfolk first, and then I had maybe 3 or 4 more months before I went to law school, and he was relieved by a new admiral, right? New boss comes in. New boss typically picks their own aides because they want, just like you would pick your own staff or you would evaluate people. And the outgoing admiral about whom the book is written convinced the new guy, said, look, this guy's got all the corporate knowledge, even though he's quote unquote getting out of the Navy. It'd behoove you just to do the transition with him. And that was just another wonderful sign of leadership. And that's what I did. And then by August of '91, I showed up at law school as a naval reservist.
Right. Again, the examples that I pointed to in the book are, I wrote down probably 7 or 8 things here that clicked with me, but out of around 130, 140 pages of the book.
Yes, 138, I think.
There's so many of those in there, and it's again such a fun read for people that want to pick this up, and it is available on Amazon, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Amazon. It's the people that don't like Amazon. It's available on Barnes & Noble website. It's available in Books A Million website, and slowly but surely in bookstores. But both Amazon and Barnes & Noble online will get it to you within 24 hours.
It's interesting because when I read the book, again, you created this image in my mind of all the individuals in it, including yourself. And I knew earlier, because I think you put the picture out of you, and I know you mentioned part with your mom, but you did the audio for the audio book.
I did the narration for the audio book.
And so you have a lovely speaking voice, as I can tell now. I didn't know that through the book, obviously. But for listeners listening, they can also listen to you read the book, correct?
Yeah, that was a very fun thing. The whole author journey from start to finish was just an eye-opening experience, and like any new job in your career, but it was a hobby. So for 30 years I did the Navy Reserve. That was my hobby. That took all my free time. When it came to the book, the publisher says, look, what do you want to do about an audiobook? I said, I want an audiobook. He said, well, do you want us to hire voice talent or do you want to do it? And I'm like, voice talent? How can voice talent be more talented than my voice? The answer is there's plenty of, there's incredible voice talent that are much better than my voice, but I just wanted to do it myself because in my mind I remembered how those people that were talking to me sounded. So like when I'm on the plane and I'm talking about Irish and the Admiral's pillow, I can tell you to this day how that guy Irish sounded. And how the Admiral sounded. So 15 hours of recording with an audiobook producer for like a 3-hour and 40-minute professionally produced audiobook. And the key, Jeff, was I said, look, when the book comes out January 28th, I want the audiobook to be the same date. I don't want it to be released 3 months later because it's amazing how many people do audiobooks now.
Yeah, it's honestly, I wanted to read it myself, but thinking about it, I may go back and do the audio of it because it is an interesting perspective, and someone who reads books, I love the idea that the author is committed to take the time to do the audio because of exactly what you just said, because you were there and you understand it, you know it, and I would want to know it from your perspective, just like the book itself. And so it is, I think, it's a testament probably to your product that you were willing to take the time to do it yourself, because again, for someone who read it, I could see where listening to it could be a much different experience and add to reading it,
Yeah, I've done that a couple times. We just read one for our book club that had a phenomenal narrator who was not the original author because the original author passed away, but it was done incredibly well. But you're right, it was fun, and even, I had a great producer who's listening to me the whole time I'm reading it. And one time I mixed up the voices, so I've got like 12 different characters there. One time I used the wrong voice, and he comes in over the earphones. He says, and he was British. He says, Mark, he says, I think you just used the wrong voice for that one. I was like, oh, okay. But that again, just like to the tribute of an editor or a good producer or a good podcast host, he was listening and he was attentive, and immediately he caught the mistake.
Yeah. No, I think that again is probably a testament to what. This is more of a passion to write this book, and going through it, and a few of those things again back to when it was written, well, I guess started maybe the foundation of it back so long ago, several decades ago, then you coming back and honing it in, dedicating it to your mom, taking the time to do the audio for it. It reads like you just didn't want to throw a book out. It reads like this was important to you. It was important for us to hear it, to understand it, and to hear it from your perspective. And that really does come across through the pages. And I haven't had the chance to listen to the audio, but I am going to do that because I love the thought that it's from your perspective of a voice, and that to me is pretty cool.
Well, thank you. I'm just really humbled and happy when I hear people say that, because I did put a lot of time and energy into it. And, every word is, when you're doing a book, every word is analyzed. And you just finally got to get to that point, when you're like, okay, it's done, right? Let's just kick it out and see what happens.
So between your day job, being on the circuit to promote your current book, getting that final chapter out, when do you think the next book's going to start?
I'll probably start it in the fall. I'm 6 months out from this book, and it really has spent, every waking moment marketing it. I've got, as you said, I've got LinkedIn. I've got 2 different pages on Facebook, because that's where my audience hangs out, and that folds over into Instagram. I'll leave it. This is, for us now, we're recording this on a Friday, so I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. First thing in the morning tomorrow morning, I'll get up and drive to Greenville, South Carolina on a Saturday for a Barnes & Noble event. So I suspect it'll be fall. I'll get to a run rate pretty soon. I'm at the Naval Academy in October, maybe 19th, but I'll get to some point where I sort of switch off the heavy marketing and then really pour the time into writing the second one.
Do you publish your book signings on your website, or are they a location where listeners could go if they're in a certain area that they can find a list of where you're going to be?
Yeah, I will do that. I usually do it in 2 places, LinkedIn and Facebook.
Okay.
I know I've got at least I've got a great one coming up in Washington, D.C. I'll be in Annapolis, get a load of this, before the Navy VMI games. So I've got 2 military teams, and the Naval Academy bookstore has been great about that. And I think that's at the end of August. And then that next Saturday afternoon, I'll be at the Barnes & Noble in D.C. somewhere. So I usually put them up there, and people are happy to. I don't think I ever turned down a LinkedIn connection.
Absolutely. So LinkedIn connection's a good spot to find you. On the website's a good spot to find you for listeners. And I can also put those in the show notes if you would like that, so people can go and pull from the show notes if you'd like to go see where Mark's website is. And if you would like, we can put your LinkedIn linked in there if
Sure.
people want to connect with you.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful, because again, it's such an honor when people show up. And then, when I have the funnest thing about those is you actually sometimes you just talk to people, they don't know anything about the book. And you spend, like our conversation, you spend 2 or 3 minutes talking to them, and they say, well, I think I'll get a copy, and that's very rewarding. And then, like I said, you look around the corner, you'll see somebody say, gosh, is that person from high school? Do I know that as a lawyer? Or is that person in the Navy with me 20 years ago? And you don't have it's not like a reunion, so you don't have a picture name tag so you can look down and see who they are, because we've all changed, right?
Yeah, that's the way it goes.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's great. Well, I appreciate you taking some time with us here today to go over this. I know we've been working on this for a little while now to get on and have discussions about it. Is there anything I didn't ask, or anything for the listeners that you would want them to know?
No, I thank you, because I know the time that it takes to put these together. I enjoy yours because it's a topical area, which is fun, and you're a natural at it. So I just am very appreciative to be your guest.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate that. I know I had big shoes to fill with your AI podcast that I listened to. That was actually pretty good.
That was scary. I mean, it was about 90% right. I mean, a friend of mine said, hey, you ought to try this. And I was like, oh, my God. Oh, no, actually, he did it. He jammed all my stuff into it, and he said, hey, take a listen to this. And
well, I love it. If you go get it,
it was unbelievable.
Yeah, you put the link on your LinkedIn for people that want to go listen. It's AI, but it's good. It's good.
Yeah, they got about 90% of the facts right. And then, and it was funny. So, Jeff, I'll close on this. So I took pictures of my billboard this past weekend up in in the Times Square, and I put that up on LinkedIn and Facebook, and somebody in the comments said, Photoshop or AI. and they were right. I mean, because I could have done that. I could have just cut and pasted something and said, put my billboard up, and So that being said, I got like 100 pictures, so there's just no way it's Photoshop or AI because I was such a geek going by there every hour taking a picture.
Well, it's interesting, and we're closing out here, but I'll say quickly with AI and where we are with it. I think it goes back to the authenticity of you as a person,
Yes.
you as writing this book, you on your audio for the book. Again, it gives I have this feeling with AI because the first time a new tool comes out, right? First one, I don't the word guilty is right over it, but I use chat. I love Chat GPT. I love
It's wonderful.
putting
Yeah.
stuff into it. It's almost like your own loop.
It really is. It's phenomenal.
But there is. I think there's going to be this moment where people want an authentic experience, and I don't think AI could replace you as like Mark, right? And
Right.
in that sense of, to your point about your experience and the human side to it. And I loved what they did on the AI podcast, but it's another one of those things where selfishly be like, well, I mean, I'm doing my own thing over there. If who's
Yeah.
gonna laugh like an idiot if it's not me?
Right. We need both.
Right.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that authenticity is not quite there yet. The emotion isn't there yet. And then, it's the same thing as we're talking about, just the voice recording. I don't know if anybody could know exactly how I wanted to read those voices and where I wanted the tone and inflection to be. Because
Right.
people were saying, well, why didn't you just get AI to narrate your book? I said, ooh, that'd be even worse than a narrator narrating my book.
Well, it's funny because it's somewhat like going to meetings and stuff, right? Like, you're like, well, what's really the difference between like what you and I are doing right now on the web versus going in person? But over the last 20 years, as we've been able to really start to really explore this virtual, if you want to do real, in my sense, business, because I see this every day we do it here, you will have a lot of these virtual meetings, but the
Right.
human experience, you're going to do a deal, you're going to sign something, you're going to come and you're going to do it in person, you're going to go, through the details. And that, to me, when I'm traveling for business, if it's important enough, right? I mean, you could do a
Yep.
conference all online. You don't have, you
Yeah.
could sign all your books and send them in the mail. And, there's something to be said about going into a Barnes and Noble, seeing the author, having him sign it, and again, because I don't know if I would have a connection with AI. I had a connection with you, which I know again sounds maybe weird or stalkery, but
No,
as
it's
an
great.
author, you read your book and you're like, I feel I don't know, you feel like you're on your journey. And when
Yeah.
you go and meet that person, that's something that's really special, right? It's like listening to an album that you love, but you go to the concert still because you want to see the artist,
Absolutely. And I feel the same way. I've got a shelf full of signed books, and some of them have been in person, but there's that personal connection. And to your point, Jeff, there's nothing that beats in-person engagement
Right.
and contact and negotiations. And, you can get so much further in a conference room with somebody because you can read them. You can, hey, how you doing? How was your weekend, before you get into the, right to it. And it comes across as genuine. So I'm a huge proponent of that.
Well, Mark, I love that. I love that you took some time with us out of your busy schedule to be on the show. And thank you again for being on Destination Aviation.
Thanks so much, and have a great day.
Well, that was a fantastic conversation we had there with author Mark Fava. Hope everybody listening picks up his book. It's a great book, a lot of lessons into it. And like I said, a lot of fun too. I had a lot of opportunities to laugh. And if anybody knows anything about me in this industry, they know I love to laugh. I had a boss once who wrote me up to say, and wrote up in a good way, to say on a evaluation that my humor, that was one of my strong suits. Now, some people don't find me funny, I'll admit that. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but I like to make people laugh, and I do enjoy a good laugh myself. And this book will definitely give you that. And it also will give you a lot of life lessons. So thank you to Mark for being on the podcast and giving us an opportunity to go pick his book up on Amazon. We'll put his webpage on the show notes, plus his LinkedIn, if you would like to connect with Mark or maybe find him at a local bookstore near you to do some signing. I know I said earlier on, folks, that I would get a episode out of just me as well, because I know the questions and comments are piling up in the email, and so I am working on that to squeeze it in. So I promise I will get that out. But thank you, as always, for listening to us here on Destination Aviation and what we have to say. The journey is always much better when you have some people on the flight deck with you. So thank you, as always, for getting on. I do try to get out something quickly, and I did have in an email. They want to use their full name, so Hank Cup wrote in about flying in his Tri-Pacer. So Hank, thank you for listening to the show and being a returning listener and being one of our passengers on this journey. And I will just quickly read here. He said, I tell you, I just love flying my Tri-Pacer. That little bird's got soul, simple, reliable, and just plain fun to fly. There's something about the way she handles that makes me feel very special. My favorite airport to fly into is the Princeton Municipal Airport, Papa November, right up near the Canadian border. It's a gem, quiet airspace, friendly folks, and the kind of scenery that makes you want to slow things down and just enjoy the moment. I still remember the first time I landed there, smooth as silk. Sun setting over the trees, and a little dinner nearby with pie that'll make you believe in aviation all over again. So whenever I'm flying north, I always look for an excuse to drop into PNN. It's one of those places that just reminds you why aviation is so special. That's a great story, Hank. Thank you for sharing that with me. I have not had the opportunity to fly in a Tri-Pacer. I know I've mentioned this in some episodes in the past. My brother has had the opportunity. He actually went up on 4th of July way back in the day and was able to see fireworks from outside of a Tri-Pacer as they flew over different firework displays in northern Michigan. But thank you, Hank, for sharing that story. It's greatly appreciated. If you have stories you would like to share with Destination Aviation, please send us an email at dapodcast85@gmail.com. That's your source for all things aviation, or www.destinationaviation.org. That's where you can find all of our episodes. You can find stuff we have going on. You can purchase a podcast sticker if you so choose. They're on there. Or if you find me out and about, I usually try to keep some in my pocket. And actually, I think we're going to be updating the podcast sticker here soon, as I'm starting to run very low on supplies. And I think we'll probably use something more similar to what we're doing now with our logos and themes. But I really appreciate everybody listening. If you enjoyed it, please tell some friends out there. And until next time, friends, I will see you down the runway.